Live from Quito, Ecuador. I'm Sonia Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. We begin with a special report from the indigenous lands in the far south of the continent, where the Mapuche communities do not recognize the modern borders between Argentina and Chile. In both countries, multinational logging companies have taken over much of their land, while the government criminalized the Mapuche struggle for their rights. Tell Us Yours, Paolo Dragnesh and Juan Pablo Arenilla traveled there to talk to one of the most important indigenous leaders. This is the first of their reports.
We are traveling to Mapuche territory, over 800 kilometers from Santiago. As we approach the area, crossing the Biobío River, which is the natural frontier, the loggers' trucks start to fill the road. They never stop, at any time of the day. The logging is unending, but this isn't just any wood. These are monoculture plantations that plant and harvest over and over again on more than 2 million hectares of ancient land, seized from the communities and now controlled by the timber companies. These trucks represent the occupation of this land. They have become targets of arson attacks, for which the different Mapuche groups are held responsible, especially the coordinator Arauco Malleco, also known as CAM. Hector Yaitul is their spokesperson and has become one of the Mapuche villagers most persecuted by the timber companies and the Chilean state. He has lived in hiding after facing several charges of criminal association. The most recent case is still pending. It's a part of Operation Hurricane, a high-profile police operation which saw the arrest of several Mapuche leaders accused of terrorism. Among these, the media celebrated the capture of Hector Yaitul. But again, there was no real evidence. Now the Mapuche are denouncing a new attempt to criminalize their people, an attempt that was partially corrected by the Supreme Court when it revoked the preventive detention of Yaitul and other villagers. All of them are being investigated under Chile's anti-terrorist law enforced since the Pinochet dictatorship, which Hector Yaitul himself fought at the time. This time, the use of this controversial law claims some kind of collaboration between the Chilean and Argentinian Mapuche against the multinational companies, but the only evidence presented by prosecutors for this alleged plan were vague text messages on unidentified phones. The investigation continues, but Hector Yaitul, now free after his provisional release, decided to receive Telesur in his shelter to talk about this struggle, which he defined as a historic demand.
We're talking about a Mapuche struggle that marked a before and after in the way of doing politics, which incorporated the element of political violence, but from the oppressed, which responded to that history of structural violence from the state and the capitalist system, which was very severe in this region.
An asymmetric war, he says, like the one against the Incas waged by the Spanish and the settlers. The Mapuche people is facing this with a new one, or the strengthening of their Huichafe ancestors, as they call the warriors in the Mapudungun language. This time, the struggle is against capitalism, which he says has its best ally in the states that promote and protect the companies to exploit their ancient lands. Lands that he says they're willing to recover at any cost.
Esto está en recuperación. Claro, esto pertenecían a particulares y está en recuperación.
We went deep into the back roads of these old indigenous reserves on the edge of the lake Leuleu. There, Hector Yaitul guided us to his cabin, convinced that the people of Latin America need to know firsthand about the struggle of the Mapuche people.
And that's a story we're going to be covering quite often right here on Tell Us Your. In Caracas, Venezuela, President Maduro has approved a new injection of resources of 1.7 trillion bolívares to help local and regional government function better. At a government meeting with the recently elected state governors, Maduro approved the new funds and also assigned 400 billion bolivares to boost workers' wages. The announcement comes as Venezuela prepares for municipal elections in December. The president also said that the Federal Council should be a space for political dialogue to solve differences. 3 opposition parties have said they will boycott the local elections. And our correspondent, Regan Devines, joins us live now from Caracas. Hello, Regan. President Maduro is talking dialogue. Any chance that can happen?
Hi. I didn't quite get that last question, but Sonia, yes, you're right. President Maduro is hoping that peace talks with Venezuela's opposition will not only help them change their minds, but these peace talks have been going on for a while, and the hope was to end any type of violent discourse and to move Venezuela forward as a progressive society that is willing to work together to solve the current economic crisis, where of course you see in the news internationally where there are long lines for bread, which there still are. There are shortages of certain food items, which there still are. It's still hard to find flour, rice at times, but things have been getting better gradually. Now this is in part, it's assumed it's due in part because of the peace talks that Maduro has been having with opposition leaders behind the scenes, and I say behind the scenes because not much information has come out of these peace talks to the public in terms of exactly what has been discussed and what the intentions are on both sides, what the requests are from the opposition, and what is going to be done by Maduro's government to help alleviate any tensions. And so the only thing that we've heard recently is that the opposition and the government are close to signing a peace accord that will then move the country forward. But in the midst of all these peace talks, Venezuela is getting ready for its municipal elections. The date is yet to be announced. 335 mayors will be chosen to represent different municipalities throughout Venezuela. We still know that certain opposition parties, 3 of them, will not be taking part as of today. That might change tomorrow, you never know. Acción Democrática, Voluntad Popular, and Primera Justicia. The CNE released today that 95 parties, both regional and national, are legally eligible to partake in the municipal elections. 22 national, 73 regional. It's interesting because a group like Acción Democrática is listed as a separate national party. This is because they were booted out of the MUD coalition by the likes of Voluntad Popular, the voice of Freddy Guevara, who said, we no longer want you in this coalition, get out, as well as Henry Capriles from Primera Justicia, who said he will no longer be a part of this MUD coalition if Henry Ramos Solup, who runs the Acción Democrática party, is part of the MUD coalition. So we're still seeing a lot of infighting with the MUD coalition. We're not too sure how long this will go on. As we said, we don't exactly know what has been discussed, although there have been members from Primera Justicia in the peace talks. Julio Borges was a part of the peace talks last week that we've heard, but he as well is calling for street protests. So we're not too sure exactly what the terms are of these peace talks, but we know that President Maduro said that he wants to continue in the path of peace, democratic means, these elections, these peace talks, and he hopes that hand in hand this will ease Venezuela forward into economic recovery. Sony.
Thanks for that update. That is Regan Devines in our Caracas office. The U.S.-based Federal Bureau of Investigation was apparently interested in the outcome of the Trinidad and Tobago elections in 1959. The website Muckrock has released FBI memos revealing that the Bureau was looking for compromising material on Eric Williams. It tweeted, U.S. government feared Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister had an anti-white complex because he snubbed them at parties. His party did win those elections, and the following year, upon independence from Britain, he became the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Cuba's 35th annual International Trade Fair has opened in Havana, with the country's trade minister saying foreign investment is already up this year, and more deals could be signed before the year's out. With more than 3,400 companies from some 70 countries participating in the fair, known as FIHAV 2017, foreign investment is especially important for the island now, given the drop in oil shipments to Cuba from Venezuela, along with heightened tensions with the United States under President Donald Trump and the damage from Hurricane Irma this summer.
I can tell you that so far this year, business deals with foreign investment totaling more than $2 billion in capital have been approved. Additionally, there are a number of projects in an advanced negotiating phase that have real possibilities to come together before year's end. This shows that despite the intentions of the United States government to reinforce the blockade and try to isolate Cuba, our country continues to awaken to a growing interest as a destination for foreign investment.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Campesinos in Cuba State in Colombia say they're facing imminent repression by the ESMAD riot police. The coordinating body of cocoa growers tweeted, "At this moment, the ESMAD are preparing to attack the mobilized communities in Cofre Cajibo in Cuaca. We demand guarantees." The mobilizations are part of the national strike that began across Colombia this week. And indigenous groups in Colombia have joined the national strike to ask for the fulfillment of the peace agreements and the rights of social leaders. More in this report.
Social protests in Colombia intensifies. Indigenous groups are now joining the campesino strike. On Monday, over 100,000 indigenous people started to mobilize peacefully across 24 states of the country to defend peace and ask for the fulfillment of the agreements.
We want to reject the threats that leaders of our people have gotten. They've been targeted and have received death threats, and we call for the indigenous youth to the Colombian youth to maintain this resistance campaign.
So far this year, 133 social leaders have been killed, 40 of whom were indigenous. Threats and intimidations from paramilitary groups are also adding up to these crimes, as well as the stigmatization of indigenous communities who are only defending their territories by the police.
The human rights situation we're going through, this year they killed 40 leaders, 10 just this month, in different regions of the country. This means that this war continues for the indigenous people. The armed conflict remains.
Under the government of President Juan Manuel Santos, the indigenous people have signed 1,300 agreements with the national government to guarantee their cultural survival and the lives of the villagers. Even when the Constitutional Court warned that 36 indigenous people were in danger because of the difficult realities that their territories face, the national government hasn't fulfilled any of the agreements.
We can't just have agreements on paper and not live up to the words. Word is sacred for us as indigenous people. That's why we're all here together for everyone to join us in this struggle that affects all Colombians.
The indigenous peoples showed their solidarity with the struggle of the campesinos and Afro-descendants who were asking for continued protest action against the forced eradication of illegal crops, and for the government to restart the voluntary substitution and the integral rural reform, which were all part of the peace agreement. The indigenous groups sent a clear message to the national government and Colombian society. They said, "Count on us for peace, but never for the war."
Social movements in Panama are protesting against impunity in the Odebrecht case, which involves 63 people. Our correspondent, Hugo Ferrer, has the details.
People are gathering in the city to protest against impunity in one of the biggest cases ever to happen in Panama. In a declaration last week, the national prosecutor, Kenya Porcel, said that the Supreme Court ordered the suspension of the investigation on the Odebrecht case, alleging that the period for the investigation allowed has ended. This case involved 63 people, among them 5 former ministers and 2 family members of high-profile public officials that, it said, managed more than $60 million. all public money. This is yet another protest organized by social movements in Panama to express their rejection of the justice system, one that is discredited since other high-profile cases that involve several former public officials were also suspended.
Hugo Vera with that report. The Argentine indigenous leader and lawmaker Milagros Salga has been taken to a hospital after denouncing the deplorable conditions in prison. The activist and leader of the Tupac Amaru movement has been asking to be transferred to a hospital for several weeks, but her request had been denied. Sala is suffering bad health and depression. She accuses the state of targeting her and others for their role in fighting for indigenous land rights. And thousands of Argentinians have taken to the streets of Buenos Aires to protest against President Mauricio Macri's announcement of new labor, tax, and pension reforms. With the slogan, "We want to know what it's about," the protesters were met with a large-scale security operation with over 400 police officers deployed. The protest came after a press conference where Macri announced his reform plans before businessmen, trade union, and government and opposition governors. President Macri presented his package as the basis for the second phase of his administration. So let's take a look at what these measures entail.
In an effort to deepen his neoliberal policies, President Mauricio Macri presented his new measures, which will occur in the next few months. He outlined his retirement plans and tax reforms for the next 2 years.
We need to advance the reforms, where everybody will start by giving a little bit. First, those with power. And I'm not talking about political power only. I'm not saying that it's easy. Change costs. But there are no excuses not to try. There's no excuses. It's now or never.
The ceremony took place with around 150 guests, among them governors, union leaders, business and judges. Macri anticipated a projected reform that includes raising the retirement age, as well as a labor reform with the main objective of changing the collective labor agreements.
There are a lot of things that Argentina needs to achieve. But I don't agree with many of the government's plans, with his economic roadmap. It's getting closer to those mistakes we already made in the past.
During Mauricio Macri's event, the voice of social movements was absent. However, they made their voice heard outside the building. There's concern among poorer sectors that claim that the new measures will affect them even more.
It's a meeting without the people, without poor people. They're discussing several reforms behind people's backs, like cutting back and advancing in measures that are really bad for the society. We've got to have a social agenda, which is absent from this space.
Macri's government has started a period of reforms, looking for general support for his public policies that will allow him to deepen neoliberal policies that he has been carrying out since he took power on December 2015.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has finished his caravan through the state of Minas Gerais in the city of Belo Horizonte. As a part of his campaign called Lula for Brazil, the former president led a rally of thousands of people in one of the city's main squares. Lula told the crowd that his candidacy was uncomfortable for the right and that he would win the presidential elections in 2018. The deposed president, Dilma Rousseff, said the Workers' Party's plan was to restore democracy in Brazil. Also in Brazil, artists such as songwriter Cantinal Veloso and actress Sonia Braga visited a large land occupation outside Sao Paulo to support protesters' demands for housing after authorities blocked a concert on the land. Since September, over 10,000 families from the Movement for Homeless People have been occupying an empty plot of land in São Bernardo do Campo, a city neighboring Sao Paulo, in protest at the lack of housing in the city.
They pulled a trick so that the show couldn't carry on. Nevertheless, we are here. We are together, me with the other artists. We are here with you.
Uruguayan singer Daniel Villighetti died on Monday in Montevideo due to complications from surgery. He was 78 years old. A beloved singer-songwriter, Viligeti led a generation of Uruguayan musicians and performers who emerged in the 1960s in creating a unique sound for the era, along with musicians such as Alfredo Zitarrosa and Los Olimarenos. He introduced what became known as the popular Uruguayan song, which was itself linked to a widely popular nueva canción, both a genre and a movement. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. The U.S. President Donald Trump has distanced himself from a junior foreign policy advisor who admitted to lying about meeting with an alleged Russian agent during last year's presidential campaign. Trump described George Papadopoulos as a low-level and a liar. And the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, described the accusations of Russian meddling in U.S. elections as tiresome.
Without a single piece of proof, we are, as you know, being accused of meddling not only in the U.S. election, but also in those in European states. Recently, there was an allegation that Moscow decided what minister to appoint in South Africa. In general, there is no limit to fantasy.
Let's go live to Washington and our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso. Good afternoon, Jorge. What's the latest in this Russian investigation?
The latest is that Robert Mueller, that is a special prosecutor, could be in danger in terms of his continuation in that investigation. Why? Because there are many people that would like him to see fired. Among them could be what it was the strategy chief of the President Trump in the White House. We're talking Stephen Bannon, that could be doing the dirty work to trying to create some support in order to defund the investigation, not necessarily to try to have him fired. We're talking about Mueller, but defund the investigation in order to kneecap him. So far, it seems that in the Senate of the U.S., we're talking about Senate, but also the House of Representatives, meaning in the Congress, there is not such a support for that idea. But Robert Mueller has created an enormous uncertainty in terms of the presidency of Donald Trump, because precisely what you were mentioning about George Papadopoulos, he has become the key element here because he has pleaded to the FBI that he lied to the FBI regarding his links or the links of the campaign of Donald Trump with Russia. At that point, we know that at this very moment, we're talking Paul Manafort, that was the former director of the campaign of Trump, and his right hand, we're talking Rick Gates, are at this very moment under house arrest. And the simple fact that the prosecutor is giving some time for them to go to the judge in front of them facing justice will create the possibility that the two of them could plea bargain with Robert Mueller and advance what did they know, what had happened with the Russians in the campaign if eventually something happened. The reason so is that now there is a living proof that there was a connection between the campaign and the Russians. Now, everybody agrees here in Washington that this is just the beginning for an investigation that could unfold many, many other surprises. And that's what we are precisely looking for here in Washington.
Thank you so much for that update. That is Jorge Gestoso giving us a comprehensive roundup of what has transpired so far in the Robert Mueller investigation into possible Russian interference in the U.S. presidential elections. Now up to other stories. Catalonia's ousted leader, Carles Puigdemont, says he's not seeking asylum in Belgium after Spain's state prosecutor recommended charges for rebellion and sedition be brought against him. However, at a news conference in Brussels, Puigdemont said he would return to Catalonia when given guarantees by the Spanish government.
The first question, I am not here in order to demand asylum, political asylum. This is not a Belgian question. I'm here in Brussels as a capital of Europe. This is not a matter of the question of the Belgian politics. It has no relationship. I'm here in order to act with freedom and safety and surety, seguridad.
And we've come to the end of this midday news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you so much for watching.